Welcome to the Dairy News and Views podcast, a production of the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. Our podcast covers current educational, research, and industry tools available for your operation to manage healthy cows and calves while producing the highest quality dairy products. Well, thanks for joining us today on Dairy News and Views from the ISU Dairy Team. I'm Jen Bentley, Northeast Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, and I'm here today with my colleague, Fred Hall, who's the Northwest Iowa Dairy Field Specialist. And we're happy to have joined with us today Amanda Chipman, Emergency Management Coordinator with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. So welcome to our podcast, Fred and Amanda.
Well, thanks for having me.
Always enjoy visiting on subjects that are important to our dairy producers. In early January, Amanda, you hosted the Foreign Animal Disease Training for Dairy Producers in Sioux Center. Outline what your goal was for this meeting.
We hosted producer focus groups in actually 4 different locations in Iowa in January, and we were seeking to understand the level of awareness producers have about foreign animal diseases and what Iowa's response to an outbreak would look like, producers' current level of preparedness for a foreign animal disease, along with their expectations, roles, and responsibilities during an outbreak, and what producers need to better prepare for an outbreak, and how we here at Iowa Department of Ag, our IDALs, can address those needs. So the information gained from these meetings will be used by IDALs to assist producers in the future. We specifically, in the dairy section, we specifically talked about the threat of foreign animal diseases like foot and mouth disease. So foot and mouth disease is viral disease that affects animals with cloven hooves, such as cattle, swine, sheep, goats, and deer. FMD is not generally fatal to animals, but it does spread quickly and causes serious illness and loss of production among cattle. And so signs to look for would be fever, lethargy, loss of appetite, and painful blisters on the feet and mouth. So
Amanda, in working with producers, I know many of our producers have some biosecurity practices already in place. When we talk about, some of those health diseases like Johne's, BVD, those types of things. So they're very cautious about wearing clean boots or having clean needles, things like that. But when we're talking about foreign animal diseases like FMD, what other things or what would be the first step that producers should do to start protecting their animals?
Yeah, there's a variety of tools for preventing and controlling foreign animal diseases, and definitely biosecurity is on the top of the list. And if it were to get into the country, also rapid diagnostics, quarantine and movement controls, and contact tracing of animals, and vaccination. But each has their own benefit and drawback, but only one of them is under the control of the livestock producer, which is biosecurity, as you mentioned. The producer has the control over their herd on a daily basis regarding animal movements, people, and supplies. They get to decide how much risk they are willing to take when it comes to disease spread and in an outbreak, and every day before that. So there are a variety of tools for preventing and controlling foreign animal diseases, and biosecurity is at the top of the list. Other things when it comes into the country would be rapid diagnostics, quarantine and movement control, contact tracing of animals, and vaccination. Each has its own benefits and drawbacks, but only one is under the control of the livestock producer, and that's biosecurity. The producer has control over the herd on a daily basis regarding animal movements, people, and supplies. They get to decide how much risk they are willing to take when it comes to disease spread. In a FMD outbreak, and every day before that, it is the producer's responsibility to implement biosecurity protocols to protect the herd from exposure. Now, biosecurity is tricky. It's not one size fits all, and each farm is unique. And so veterinarians are key to helping producers design individual biosecurity plans that are feasible and also implementable. So biosecurity can start with having a clearly defined line of separation, or LOS, between the animal areas and the areas outside the farm. The purpose of the LOS is to limit the movement of viruses into the animal areas. The LOS needs to be clear, and employees and visitors should be adequately trained to respect the LOS. Access into the animal areas, which is crossing the LOS should include some mitigation procedures, as you mentioned, changing boots, cleaning, and disinfection. So another good place to start is just keeping records of all the movements on and off the farm. Having good records can help assess the risk that each movement may have. And in the event of an outbreak, it can help us trace where disease could have come from and where it could be going.
This LOS is really interesting to me, having went through the high path where they truly had a line that feed trucks didn't cross over, egg trucks didn't cross over. We saw a big change. On the dairy side, we're still going to have milk being hauled. So what are some of the things that are unique to the dairy people?
Definitely, I think about just milk movements and having a clean line between where that milk truck is going to go and where the hose is going to go compared to the animal, cross traffic. So not having anything that could drag manure from, one farm to the other, which could be the tires of a milk truck. We want to make sure that we don't drag that into the farm and contaminate the animals. So I definitely think, a lot about milk movements and how we can do that in a biosecure manner.
Let's discuss some of the routes of exposures that maybe most concern idols.
Animals can shed foot and mouth disease in bodily fluids, so saliva, urine, milk, and semen. And it's also aerosolized, so it can spread through the air. So I think that would be, a big concern, but it can be spread through direct contact, like healthy animals contacting a sick animal, or there's all of the indirect contacts, like we talked about with milk truck tires or the driver. FMD can come into the animal because it's contaminating something else first. So the boots and the hands and the clothing of the people. We also have to think about water sources. If they have access to like a stream, that FMD could spread that way too.
Another question here that as I was thinking about this is not a zoonotic disease, right? So it's not transmissible to humans. It's strictly from animal to animal contact.
That is correct. It cannot come into humans. They can only carry it, as a fomite, so like on their boots, but they can't be infected by it. It also is not a food safety concern either. It cannot be, transferred to us because we eat the meat.
And that would be the same also for drinking the milk?
Correct. Yes. Yeah, it can be spread to another, a calf by drinking the milk, but not to a human.
If we have a foreign animal disease, what happens that'll affect dairy producers? Kind of walk us through, at least the first week.
Movement restrictions of susceptible livestock species is one strategy to control and contain a foreign animal disease. And so should there be a positive diagnosis in the US, the USDA might recommend a 72-hour national movement standstill of all susceptible species and their products. So that includes milk. A positive diagnosis in Iowa will lead to IDOLs defining a control area around that infected premises, and that'll be 10 kilometers around. And IDOLs in Iowa, IDOLs has the authority to quarantine all premises with susceptible species that reside in that control area. So these farms would have to follow certain criteria like testing and apply for a movement permit to move animals or milk if you wanted to move within the control area, outside of the control area, or into the control area. Another thing that would affect them, I think about contact tracing and COVID to figure out where the disease may have spread or where it could have come from. We have to look at movement records and trace in and trace out the information, and that will be collected as fast as we can to understand where the disease could have come from or where it could be spreading. This is why it's so important to keep records, to trace things in and out, so that controls can be put in place to stop the further spread of this disease. If we have a chance to stamp out the disease before it spreads too far, the infected animals will be depopulated and disposed of in a way that will hopefully minimize the risk of the disease spreading to other susceptible species. So all of IDALS's foreign animal disease response plans can be found on our website, iowaagriculture.gov. We have plans for a variety of response actions, such as general standstill, control and monitoring zone, as well as disease-specific plans like FMD. These plans do change. They always have the word draft on them. They continue to evolve and be updated due to, exercising them, federal policy changes, scientific discovery, outbreaks, and the world situation.
When we were visiting over at the meeting in Sioux Center, one of the things that we talked about was our commercial herds. We have premise ID. We're familiar with this conversation, but how important is it going to be for these hobbyists who maybe, they have a lamb or they have a calf on their little acreage? How are we going to deal with them?
It's a great question, Fred. When we draw that control area, we're going to need to identify all of the premises that are within that control area. And we do that through our premises identification number and database. And so if those small farms or small producers don't have a premises identification number and they need to be tested because they're in the control area, then they're going to be assigned a premises identification number at that point. And so it will just take us longer to respond and longer to get a movement permit and things like that. And so it's really important that everyone, whether you have a large dairy or whether you have just 5 animals, it's important that we get those premises identification number ahead of time. It's free, it's confidential, and if you need a permit during an outbreak, then you'll have to have a PIN.
So Amanda, is the best way to go about getting that premise ID is that located on the website as well?
Yes. In the Animal Industry Bureau section, there's a livestock traceability section on our website, and you can fill out a new application, or if you just need to update some of the contact information, there'll be a number there that you can call our office and update the information that's associated with your PIN.
Amanda, we've talked about the premise ID, but what else can dairy farmers do today to prepare themselves for an outbreak in the future?
I think working with your veterinarian to assess and enhance the biosecurity protocols and procedures that are on your dairy. We can always be improving our biosecurity. Even if we're a lot better than we were 5 years ago, there's still room for improvement, and that's the best way to protect your herd from these diseases. Also, making sure you understand what the clinical signs are. So there again, work with your vet to know what to look for and when and how to report it, whether that's to your local veterinarian or straight to IDALS or the USDA. So anyone working with the animal should be familiar with the signs, the clinical signs of these diseases. And also you can continue to learn more about foreign animal disease preparedness and response through podcasts like this or workshops and webinars.
Fred, I'm sure it was pretty valuable to attend the in-person program, because I think that's where a lot of the great discussions start happening, and the what ifs and how do we go about that. And if producers are there in the same room, they can start to think about some of this information and process it, and maybe start to put a plan in place as they're visiting with neighboring dairies and start to think about their own plans, right?
Yeah, and it was good to have multi-species there because, if I've got stock cows next to my dairy neighbor, we're all in the boat together. So the conversations were really interesting.
With the information that we gathered from these focus groups, we will, take that and move forward with different activities, whether it's workshops or webinars or different written materials. We'll take the information that we heard from producers and create more in the future. So I don't know, specifically, we might not have more focus groups, but we do have an FMD workshop, and as well as an African swine fever workshop that are coming up in the future.
Great. Well, that sounds good. And I'll include the website that you gave here in the podcast in the show notes so that people can directly link there and get that information and check it out. I want to thank you for being on the show here today. You've given us a lot of good management tips to think about and implement as we prepare for protecting our cows in the event of a foreign animal disease outbreak. So again, thanks Amanda and Fred for being on this podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or combination inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.